Hey, this is Mark Ray.
And Zach Desjardins.
Welcome back to EdTech Remix. We are closing up our series, conversation series on the OSPI, Washington State, and ISTE, Educational Technology Standards. And today we're going to be talking about Global Collaborator, which is kind of an exciting one. And we have a wonderful guest with us, John Zingale, who's done a lot with kind of community outreach. In fact, I think he's just coming back from a trip from Washington, D.C.
Last night, yeah.
So he might be a little bleary this morning. So,
what'd you bring along today to show us to kick this off today?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Here I have my, so with the theme of Global Collaborator, I have my, I think this was probably a bag that was given as, like, if you travel first class or frequent flyer. I don't think they even had frequent flyer programs back when this bag was created. So this is a bag from Northwest Orient Airlines, which became, became Northwest Airlines. They dropped the Orient part, and then I can't remember what it became. Shoot, I forgot. But we've got a beautiful picture of a plane. It says 747, but knowing enough about the 747, I don't think that's really the diagram of a plane for 747. And inside, oh, look what we have here. So this is, again, I realize that I think I have more props at home than most normal people should have. But this actually is the Apple, I'm not exactly sure what it says here, but anyway, it's the adapter kit so that you can plug your Apple device in around the world. And this is something I found at Goodwill, secondhand. It was probably a $75 product.
Oh yeah, I bet it was more than that.
Yeah, because the high price of being able to plug your Apple product. So it has all the various adapters, so you can plug. That one looks familiar. That's the what do they call that? There's a name for it. The duck.
Oh yes, duckbill. Yeah.
I'm not sure why they call it the duckbill adapter, but anyway, that's one that would work here. And then of course they have the enormous British plugs. These things, having lived overseas a little bit, I remember plugging things in like appliances, and of course they have 220 instead of 110, and these things are just enormous. I'm just really impressed with the size of that. But anyway, so this is the analogy here, I guess, would be is the ways that we use technology around the world. We just have to change the plugs.
You just need an adapter kit.
It's really easy. Yeah. What else do I have? I do actually, having been in Finland over the last year, I brought back some amusing confections here. We have salmiakki, which is a salt licorice.
Looks like a pack of cigarettes almost.
Yeah, no, it actually kind of tastes a little bit. You want one?
I'm all right. I'm all right for now.
You'd probably be disgusted by it, but that's kind of tasty. Anyway, so yeah, but I mean, I think of a global collaboration before internet. It was a transatlantic phone call.
Yeah, and I even would even compare it to. I remember being in elementary school where we had pen pals. When you're riding off to another.
I remember that.
It could be globally, it could be locally, it could be across the states. But it was analog, and you put it in the mail and waited, and there was no schedule or anything like that. But you shared your experience. I remember, I think it was in second grade in Mrs. Bruce's class. We did that. Yeah. I don't remember all the details on that, but I remember doing it in that time.
I do. I hadn't thought about that for a long time, but I do remember we did that, and then of course there was just even correspondence too. We would fill out a self-addressed stamped envelope and send it off to some anonymous post office box somewhere to get correspondence. But I just don't remember. I mean, we growing up in elementary school, I remember having news stories. We would have to get the weekly readers, I think they were called, and it would talk about things that were happening around the world. So there was, I remember really being pretty aware of as much global knowledge as was available in the 1970s, but the idea of reaching out and connecting with other cultures was very different. Well,
and I would say even the tools and technologies we have now enable that so much easier, quicker, and that's a new revolution almost. Yeah. If you look at when you were saying that, I was thinking about my final year in college. I did something called PACE, P-A-C-E. It's standard for something as an acronym. But essentially, I was doing my student teaching here at Fort Vancouver High School for Lewis and Clark College back in Idaho. And I was part of the special program, and it was all web-based and camera-based. So we would meet with our professors, and that concept was so revolutionary in a sense. And that was only, 15, 16 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
So we've come up, and so now you can pull out your phone and FaceTime anybody at any time.
Yeah.
In a second,
Yeah, I'm doing some collaboration with Finnish educators just in the last year or so. I've gotten some things going, and I remember when I was young, because my mother was Finnish, and I had relatives in Finland. We would periodically travel there. We'd had to get out our travel bag and go to get on a plane to Finland.
Northwest was bought by Delta.
That's right.
Delta.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think, honestly, we may have actually been on a Northwest Orient jet once going on our way to Finland. But anyway, the only, I would see my relatives in the summer, and maybe every now and then we get a Christmas card or something like that. But now, I'm collaborating with these Finnish colleagues, including my cousin, who's a teacher, and she, we just get on Zoom, and we have to account for the time and such. But it's just, to me, having lived through a pre-internet, pre-networked environment, because I am an old guy, it still blows me away that we can be for free having a conversation with video with people in Europe. It's kind of cool. So this standard, we'll kind of get introduced, and then we'll get John in here, is students use digital tools to broaden their perspectives and enrich their learning by collaborating with others and working effectively in teams locally and globally. Again, like all of the standards, they try to pack as much as possible into that one standard. Kind of curious, what kind of stands out for you, Zach?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think one is in our district we use an instructional framework called SAMR, S-A-M-R, substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And we often joke in the sense that we do SAM fairly well. Yeah. But to get to that redefining the learning experience, it takes an authentic audience, and that can be, and that pairs very, very, very well with this standard because it's a global collaborator. So that potentially could be a global audience. It could be a local audience. It could be a very unique or niche audience as well. But to get student work and student interaction with a global audience is sometimes difficult, through policy and just all that kind of things kind of start to weigh into that. So the thing I like about this one is it focuses our attention on that authentic audience.
Yeah, and I like the idea of broadening perspectives. I think in terms of kind of some steps back that we've had over the last few years in terms of our global vision as a country. And kind of being much more insular and protecting our borders and kind of the I don't want to get political, but we definitely have turned inward and more less global, I guess is maybe the best way to put it.
Well, and I think ISTE is really the timing on this for them to release this type of standard. It's been out for a couple years now, but in response to even the powers and technologies that are now in the world to bring it, we say it's smaller, a world same size, but it seems smaller because you can talk to Finland on Zoom like that for free. And so our students need to be prepared to interact in that world. And the education I had, that was not a focus. No. And maybe, writing something on a pen pal wasn't necessarily that reactive, so maybe they didn't need to prepare me for that because that technology or those tools didn't exist.
Yeah, and we don't, instead of pen pals, we have social media.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a very, very different, much more immediate, you don't have to wait until...
Yes, it is.
And instead of just having one pen pal, you can have thousands.
Yes, you can, yes.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to having John join us here in just a second, and we'll dive into the standards in detail.
All right.
Hey, we're back. Zach, you want to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. So, John Zingale was one of our teachers over at ISTE. And so you want to take just a minute to introduce yourself, what your experience has been, what you've been working on?
Sure. Once again, I'm John Zingale. I teach at Vancouver ISTE Preparatory. Been there for 6 years now. I'm finishing up year number 6. And, at our school, we try to re-envision education being a project-based school with a STEM focus. And so as a social studies teacher, I really try to take on that technology focus and engineering within our social studies constructs, along with thinking archaeologically and looking at social studies really as a social science. And so we take on different projects here within the community a lot of the time, but then try to expand them out past our borders and everything like that. So it's been a lot of fun to push the boundaries of tech and innovation at our school.
And social studies really lends itself to that external, global kind of, whether it's your local community or national or global. That's an easy transition theoretically for social studies teachers.
Yeah, social studies really is the confluence of pretty much every subject that you teach. It's because we try to get to this piece of active citizenship eventually, and so in order to get there, you need students to understand a little bit of everything from every subject matter, from civics to geography to weather to geology to politics to economics to religion. All of those different things fit into it. And even within the social studies construct, you start off with like world studies, and you're looking at the globe and looking at ancient history, and then you get into your local state history, and you'll get into the U.S. history, and you look at that from different themes or eras and stuff like that. So it really does bring everything together pretty easily.
So we've been going through a series and looking at each of the ISTE standards. And then so today what we'd like to do is kind of run through the Global Collaborator standard with you. And we'll read the indicators and kind of ask if you have any insights on that or how you've seen that play out in your classrooms or in your own context that you're teaching.
Excellent.
All right. So the first one is students use digital tools to connect with learners from a variety of backgrounds and cultures, engaging with them in a way that broadens mutual understanding and learning. So off the top of your head, how do you see that playing out in your classrooms? What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, that digital tools, especially, and we've been working together on getting the Google Glass for Education tools since the very beginning.
Yes, we have.
We were the first pilot. I still have the video from when we launched that.
Yeah.
Those tools themselves just lend to global communication because you can have students not in the same place working together on the same document. But really then each student brings their own background and culture and things into the stuff that we're learning. And so even just within your classroom or even if you have just two schools working within your district, you're bringing together so many diverse backgrounds if you're working on the same type of project together. Once you open it up to across state lines or across country lines, we can still now communicate so easily versus writing the old pen pal letter.
We were just talking about that.
And there's still value in that old pen pal letter, but there's instantaneous feedback of collaboration. I keep telling the students, when we were in Washington D.C. on our one field trip, there was a woman working there. She had to get out her laptop, and she was on a Google Doc with someone. We were in Washington D.C. and there was someone else from Tokyo, Sydney, Australia, and Milan on the same document. And it's just, that can't happen without this technology. And allowing our students to learn how to use that effectively and efficiently, I think is one of the greatest tools we can give them as they move forward.
The technology, I think, really takes away the technical challenge of doing the collaboration. It seems to me, though, that one of the issues is that how do you teach students to be to effectively work within that environment? So if you have people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different experiences, how do you prepare them to be able to collaborate effectively? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's always a challenge. I teach middle school, so especially, sometimes the first thing the kids want to do is, test the boundaries of what they can do with some of that technology. And I just think, if you teach respect within your classroom and go through, these are our, we kind of set up our guidelines of how we're going to treat this as a tool and not a toy. I think so many people, when they see technology in education, they see these fancy things like an iPad and all these things, and they can be toys. Kids can game on them. But if we're using them properly in the right construct, they're really powerful learning tools.
Yeah.
And we need to teach our kids how to do that because they're still kids at heart, and they play on their phones. And I know even my 5-year-old wants to, she's learning some math equations and stuff by gaming.
Yeah.
But we need to set those guidelines up kind of in the first couple of days and just stick to it with the kids, and allow them to know that they can hold themselves accountable if they're working together and they see something that's not right to them. Bring it to our attention, and then we can have a conversation and make it a real learning moment. And also then, allow the kids, especially when you start to get globally, things you say in one language can be offensive to someone else in another one, and really trying to understand and be empathetic of these different things. It is it's definitely work, but it's work that needs to be done.
Yeah, and it's a process, and I appreciate what you said about that, and I really appreciate that ISTE put this portion in there in the sense that it's, using technology can be a game or it can be a very novel concept, right? Mm-hmm. But even they called it out in this first indicator, and they, from a statement, they said broaden mutual understanding and learning. So they're already looking at what Mark asked, that broaden understanding, but they are tying it back to learning right away too. And it would have been really easy to leave that part out of there and assume that.
Right.
They call it out.
It's one thing when you I'm doing stuff digitally, and I take a worksheet and I've just made it digital.
Sure.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really engaging the learner with this new technology, except, or if you give them a challenge, like, hey, go research this, go find this, like create a web quest where they have to actually use these digital tools to access material and talk to one another. And that creates a whole different type of actual, authentic learning experience.
Yeah.
So the next standard is 7B, which is students use collaborative technologies to work with others, including peers, experts, or community members to examine issues and problems from multiple viewpoints. I remember enough about when ISTE was formed is that one of the kind of guiding ideas behind that school was to meaningfully engage with community partners in the learning process. And you said you've been, with ISTE for 6 years. So, so what does that look like in the context of your program?
Yeah, it's, collaboration is one of the number one things that we talk about within our classroom. Very seldomly are kids doing anything in silo. There's teams, and that's one thing I at least strive for, is I don't use the term groups in my classroom. Mm-hmm. I use the term teams very intentionally, because I think, some students may be stronger at others than doing certain things, and when you're doing projects, they can pull on their strengths and work on their weaknesses together. And so we create this community within the classroom that they're working with. But then as we've grown and I've gotten more comfortable with what we do, we've found that community members, especially here in our city and even in other places, really want to work with schools. They really honestly do, but they don't know how to contact schools or where to even begin that process. And so I've created our Fort Vancouver virtual reality project now, and it's been going on. It's going into year number 5-ish, in our third iteration of it, that we're working directly with the National Park Service. And I don't know too many other schools that can do that, but that was just simply, I approached them with an idea and a problem that I saw, and they were willing to hear us out and get involved. And then now the next year they came and said, okay, well, here's a problem we're thinking about. And then now I know we just had some of our students helping to design the new cultural center that might be on the fort. And we might be rebuilding this old ship from these blueprint designs that they found. That stuff just kind of happens organically and grows. But you can't, as a teacher, you can't be afraid to ask. What's the worst thing they're going to say is no. Okay, then we move on to something else. But I think organizations just want to feel they don't know where to go either. And so it's a tough one to kind of build, but once you get a couple good schools doing it, it can kind of grow from there.
So you alluded to your Fort Vancouver project. I'm not that. You've shared kind of a little bit of it. So 2-minute elevator speech. What is the précis of that project that you just kind of alluded to?
Sure. So it started off, a colleague and I were there in December, 4 years ago, And we
There
paid
being where?
at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site.
Here in Vancouver, Washington.
Here in Vancouver, Washington, which I drove by every day.
That Vancouver.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Actually,
that Vancouver.
the original Vancouver.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly.
And it was cold and windy out, and we paid to get in the national park, and we wanted to go into the buildings, but because national park funding was cut, we couldn't. And so we said, well, how can we alleviate this? And so the 360 imagery stuff was just kind of still in its infancy. Google Expeditions wasn't really out yet, but I had been playing around with a little bit of it, and I said, well, can we do this? And so I played around over winter break, finding that you could put 360 images on Google Maps. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then I went to our principal at the time, Christina Allemonger, when I got back, and I said, I want one of these. And it was a camera that just took 360 images.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, well, what for? And I'm like, I think we can do something amazing with Fort Vancouver. And she's like, okay. And so she said yes to my ask, and then I was tasked with finding out how we can do it. And it didn't take that much time. I made a sample tour of climbing Mount St. Helens with our staff that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, we can do this. And so then I went to the fort and said, hey, we want to help people get into these buildings that they can't see. And we want to help educate people. And we did it through an archaeological lens. So not only did we create a virtual reality tour, but the kids are acting as archaeologists throughout it. Then the next year, they said, well, we have all these artifacts that we can't display, like any museum does. And so I'm like, okay. And I had to sit down, I didn't know what photogrammetry was, had no idea what the term was. But then next thing I know, we're diving into this head first, and we created an online 3D virtual exhibit that has 116 different artifacts on it that the students 3D scanned, did the archaeological thinking, created this whole thing. And now that's been seen in 23 different countries. I've been working directly with a teacher in Australia, with people in Israel. I was just in Washington, D.C., where another group found our work and then color 3D printed it using students on the autism spectrum to get them the digital skills that they don't normally get. And so I was just talking with another teacher from New Hampshire over the weekend, too. So it's kind of growing, and it's becoming a model as social studies, history, the social sciences can use and leverage these new technologies to curate the world.
Yeah.
And when we see what happened with it in Brazil, with the whole museum burning down, I think it's more, and the Notre Dame Cathedral, it's more important than ever to kind of create another backup for this. And if we can get kids interested in technology and social studies, then I think
I'm hearing two things. One is the authenticity of the audience, which I think is you alluded to that earlier, Zach. And then the other thing I think that jumps out to me about this is it's not simply creating content for student consumption, but the students are actually the constructors and the do the research and build the context for that work, which I think is, again, we do a lot of consumption in education, and I think that this is a great example of how you can really get the students literally in the dirt or in the space to create that stuff.
And the people from the fort, they were more than happy to. We do field trips there too, but they came in, they brought their catalogs, they taught the kids how to read their archaeological catalogs. If they had questions, they could email them, directly. So the kids they would CC me on the emails, but they're the ones communicating with these professionals out there. And the more we can give kids those authentic opportunities, I think the better off they're going to be.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too that's one of the themes that is woven throughout all these standards is that idea, and I've used the America's Funny Home Videos analogy a dozen times, but it's that consumer is now creating, and in a real way, and not just for other peers, for others above them, beyond them,
right?
Different countries.
Some projects don't have to necessarily be that big either. We just got done writing letters to our senators and representatives about constitutional issues that our middle schoolers felt important. Yeah, and I just said, okay, I'm going to print them off. And as you guys know, I just got back from Washington D.C. I hand delivered those letters, and the kids take this huge ownership role over that. They're like, wait, these people are actually going to read my work, and as soon as you change that audience from just the teacher, it really amps the game up for students. And
so that was kind of one of the comments you said I want to hit on, and then it kind of brings us into our next indicator. You made a comment a little while ago about the difference between groups and teams. It caught my attention. I was hearing somebody speak on that idea, and I don't know if I can get this quote right, but he essentially was saying that you're put into groups, but teams, there's a sense of ownership. You may even be put on a team, but there's still a sense of ownership. And that kind of plays into this next indicator where students contribute constructively to project teams, assuming various roles and responsibilities to work effectively toward a common goal. So you already kind of started to hit on that. Was there anything else in there that might jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the verbiage that teachers use within their classroom is very important when it comes to this. And, I work with my other incredible colleagues, Brad Lehman and Maddie McGrew on National History Day, and then Cindy Hagan for spare parts, or this big robotics thing that we just did. And even with Fort Vancouver, she has the kids then build apps that teach people about the forts and everything. And there's this whole idea of, when we form, this is interesting because I just got back from Nationals, a history day, and I was talking about how we form that. And we don't necessarily let the kids pick who they want to work with. We give them topics, they get time to research, and then they select what they want to study. Yeah. And even within the Fort Vancouver, it's like, hey, what building do you want to study? We allow them to have that voice and choice and ownership as much as possible within that, and that creates this bigger ownership piece within it. And when you're building museum exhibits or stuff, some kids might be better at using power tools than others. So it doesn't, maybe they do a little less writing than everyone else, but I have ways to getting at analyzing all that. Yeah. But without that team member, that team might not be successful, right? So we can't devalue their role within it, and then someone else might be good at Photoshop, and so that student takes on that role. And it's allowing the students to kind of see their strengths, utilize them, but then also still work on improving their weaknesses. And I think the concept of a team lends itself to that. You can use the analogy, the quarterback can't throw the ball if the offensive line doesn't keep the defense from hitting him, right? That, like, even though your role isn't moving the ball, you need to be there helping out with everything else.
So our last one is students explore local and global issues and use collaborative technologies to work with others to investigate solutions. So I'm seeing, I know you've done a lot at the local level, and also these global issues. So what do you have? What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, we've been taking on a lot of those things, global issues too. I know with our sixth graders, we look at in Washington State, we have to do these classroom-based assessments. We have to look at how a current issue relates to past issues. And so we've been looking at the issue of, like, migrants and refugees, because there's a lot of crises happening from Central America to Syria and Yemen.
Pretty much everywhere around the world.
Right, the Rohingya.
Right now. I mean, no, really.
The Rohingya, right.
A global challenge.
And we try to ground that in, like, learning about the Huguenots and the MS St. Louis when, Jewish refugees were sent here to the United States and then sent back to Europe. And a lot of them died because they were sent back. And letting them see, like, how different groups were accepted and different groups were rejected, and then allowing them to form their own opinion. Like, what should we do with these current refugees? Do we help them? Do we not help them? Like, what do we need to do? And it's really interesting to hear kids come to some sort of conclusion about that. Like, some may say, well, I think we really need to help them, but we also have issues here in our own country that we need to try to deal with first. And that's not me telling them that. That's them coming to that on their own conclusion. But they're starting to think about these local and global issues of homelessness, that Brad and Paula do the tiny home project at our school, right? Yeah. And that happens because we can communicate across devices very easily, and we can, have a Skype interview with a teacher or a community member that can't make it in, but we can still learn from them. And so without technology, I mean, it still would be possible, but it would be still very hard to actually get what we do done within that certain amount of time.
Yeah. Certainly makes the outcome and the process simpler and the outcomes potentially more powerful.
Right.
I think that's an interesting point, though, about these issues are, I mean, the standard is global collaborator, but almost everything that is global is now local as well. Yep. And even in little old Vancouver, Washington, and Southwest Washington, it's those issues are front and forward for us in our community. And so I guess maybe for educators out there, you don't have to have a connection with someone in Australia or Yemen or Europe to be able to engage in this work.
No, not at all. I mean, and you can just reach out to your local food bank. I mean, or other community people that we have. I mean, ask your parents. You know, here in the Northwest, the big thing has been forest fires, right? So you can talk about that as an issue, and then what does deforestation do? What does, you know, to the soil, and how does that, you know, harm or hurt our countries and our global the climate change that's going on? And then, I mean, if you can dig into that topic, that's a global issue. That's not local to Vancouver, Washington. It's not local to Trenton, New Jersey. It's not local to Austria. That's a global issue, and kids want to. It is that, I know that one in particular is forefront on their mind, and they want to talk about that and want to learn about it. And so I think these digital tools allow us to really investigate that and read the different reports and try to do close reading and teach them how to read science and how to read social studies and how to read English, and all of these things, you know, come together.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the barriers for entry for this, as I think about, you know, okay, so this is great. Teachers and educators want to, you know, kind of pursue this. You earlier alluded to, you mentioned the challenge of building those partnerships, those external partnerships and relationships. So are there some suggestions that what have you learned, I guess, in trying to build those partnerships that educators might be able to use?
I've learned that community members want to work with schools.
Okay.
I mean, I think I've been told no once maybe in all of my different things, and even within that, it was just like they wanted to help with the project, but the timing didn't work for them.
Yeah.
And so, you know, because whether it was studying Mount St. Helens and bringing in scientists and sharing what they've learned while our kids are filming documentaries about it, you know, it's like they want to come and help, but so many times schools are the ones restricting who can come in sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but if you as a teacher can justify it, which I don't see why a principal wouldn't support some of this stuff. And once you get that support, then you can go out to the community and say, like, hey, I'd like to do this.
Yeah.
Does it help to have
listening to them too, because they might have a different issue that you haven't thought about that might better fit what's going on.
So that was my next question, is like, do you come with a do you have a one-page summary that you kind of your elevator speech that you propose to the person, or is it do you also do some listening and kind of identify what their challenges are and what they would like to do, so it's a win-win?
Yeah, we'll definitely start off with some sort of idea that we'd like to do. You know, even with when we switched from the virtual reality to the augmented reality, I'm thinking like, it was Pokemon Go. I'm like, how can we create something that engages audiences in a different way, right? But then that evolved into this different museum thing, right? Because we sat and listened and created a different conversation. The first time, it was kind of like, hey, let's just try this, right? And I had identified a problem, but they also acknowledged that was an issue as well. So they went out and said, okay, let's do this. I think you have to be willing to listen, because without that, just like in our global sphere and everything, we have to listen to all the different perspectives and be cordial about it and be open to listening to different perspectives, because then that brings us back to the first one, and the variety of backgrounds and cultures. Because the problem that I see might not be a problem that the person running the program sees, and there's learning between that I can do, there's learning that they can do, and there's different learning that the students can do, and it doesn't mean that both things can't happen simultaneously, to create even a richer learning experience for the students.
So we've addressed and explored Global Collaborator. Last thoughts, Zach, or observations?
Yeah, I think it's interesting on how intentional some of the verbiage is, not only in this standard and indicators, but all of them. You know, I think it's really important. I think there's a lot of thought that went into this on ISTE's side. And you know, the example earlier under 7A, when they talk about, they could have easily left that clause out about, you know, broad and mutual understanding and learning, you know, and they didn't need that. But I think I put it in there, the intentionality it brings to that is key. And you could pull out parts on all these.
And I think it says it in their name now. They're not the American science, right? They're the international science and technology and education.
Yeah.
And I think these fit worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, again, I would agree with you. This is the last of the 7 episodes, at least at this point, that we've done addressing these, and it's fascinating how what you talked about, John, resonates in almost everybody that we had as guests.
Yep.
So it didn't matter what the standard was. There were some recurring themes, collaboration, student ownership, authenticity that came through again and again in every single conversation.
They're braided very tightly together throughout.
And the biggest thing I would say is with some of these, teachers are sometimes afraid to take on some of these different things and these different projects. They have to be supported by administration to do those types of things. Otherwise, they're not going to step out on that limb, where it can be very scary. I know there's a lot of teachers out there that are, this is a lot of new, but there's a ton of teachers doing such amazing work out there and doing this stuff in their communities. And I think there needs to be some other way to kind of like amplify that so that we can see that, like, there are these experts in every town that other teachers can reach out to enhance the learning across the board. So this type of learning doesn't happen in silos, in little buildings or little like sections of a building across the country and across the globe. There's got to be a way to bridge that. I think that's the next step, is sharing and all of this stuff with everyone.
All right. Well, I guess that's our next podcast.
Is that right?
All right. Well, it's been great to chat with you, John. This is Mark Ray.
And Zach Desjardins.
And this has been EdTech Remix. See you next time.